Sukanya holds the field. Sukanya may be correct, may not be correct. 45 is comparable to 8 but not comparable to 8. 45 is different from New York Convention, but the definition of an agreement is one which leads to a foreign award capable of being enforced in New York Convention. So if a reference is made from India, but an award is made somewhere else, when somebody applies for enforcement of the award, and they say, who are you? I'll say, I'm a person claiming through the party. And then you go and apply New York Convention. What happens? Because New York Convention doesn't allow any person claiming through or under. Those words are missing. It's here. Then what happens? If it is made in India or arbitration takes place here, things are very clear. New York Convention protects the award either by the place or by the law, by the governing law. But what if it is made somewhere else? What if this reference is in Switzerland, which anyway doesn't recognize or accept the doctrine of group of companies? Then what happens? So in my view, it is an important milestone which was probably relevant to be acknowledged that these things exist. Was it really necessary to go in such depth in this judgment is a big question mark, and that is open for debate because that's why we are here for. What are the consequences of this judgment? According to me, it leaves more questions unanswered than what it really answers, and more fundamental questions of what extent you can bring in principles of CPC in order to do substantial justice so that parties are put to their bargain of arbitration and are not allowed to defeat that is also very ambivalent. So I think this judgment leaves some loose ends which hopefully more debate will give us better insight either academically or sometimes in a judgment where all these issues can be properly answered. And that is what I wish to say. Barring that, I also want to add that Law Commission has come out with that 246 report, which has proposed that section 2H must be amended, and that amendment must read like section 45, any person claiming through or under. And the comment is, so that the view of chloro control is fortified. So that is also another point, which is the view they want to fortify. The second thing is, it's good that parties must go beyond the arbitration agreement because it's a commercial world. So there can be assignments, there can be succession in interest. So those intervening facts should not permit parties to defeat the contract arbitration agreement. And secondly, the principle of subsidiary company and parent company, the principle of single economic unit versus different legal personality of a corporate entity, as discussed in Vodafone also. That should not be used to defeat or play fraud on somebody. Those are all right things, of course. But when we are invoking doctrines and acknowledging availability of multifarious principles across international jurisdiction, trying to bring them under 45, the context of 45 should not be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Devansh. That was quite insightful. I have a few questions which I'll reserve once Devesh has spoken. But I'll make two quick comments. When you were talking about Section 45 in New York Convention, I would recommend the audience to perhaps go through this judgment, Astro versus Lippo, which is a Singaporean judgment, where the Singaporean court refused to enforce an award, but the Hong Kong court instead enforced that same award. And the question here was very similar. It was other parties claiming through one arbitration agreement. That was one point. And the second quick point I wanted to make was, Devansh was talking about the Law Commission report. Incidentally, I was part of the committee, and we were discussing inclusion of the Section 45 wording into Section 8, because otherwise the repercussions of Sukanya could have been very large. The point being, any crafty lawyer would then make an argument that the contract involves some other parties, and therefore the arbitration agreement should not. The whole purpose will be defeated. I'll now ask Devesh to speak about the situations where parties can be perhaps.
Mind if I speak from there?
Sure.
It's pretty easier. I can use the. I think even without this, I should be audible. Okay. So to start with something, I don't know how many of you have heard of this gentleman called Rusty Park, William Park. He is a heavyweight when it comes to the word of arbitration. Rusty Park once very famously commented, like consummated romance, arbitration rests on consent. And I think basically that is the whole ethos of this concept, which I think has not been fully appreciated by the Supreme Court in flow controls. If you look at the whole dichotomy of the debate, it basically boils down to this. Internationally, this has always been seen as an outcome of consent, whereas what the Supreme Court in flow controls has done has made it an outcome of connection or connectivity or connexity, whichever way you put it, on the facts and circumstances of the case. Now, where does this actual theory hold its roots to? When you look at the New York Convention, this is a convention of 1958. Obviously, there were some pretty wise people who were part of that negotiating group. Obviously, it took a lot of persuasion to ensure that all the high contracting parties came together and agreed to the terms of it. Because if everyone didn't agree to it, what's the point of signing a convention? And India was one of the first, I think it was part of the group of plenipotentiaries when they were negotiating the convention in 57. And they eventually signed in 58. The thing is, what you would find very curious is this is a convention on recognition and enforcement of foreign arbitral awards. So what does an article like Article 2 do in a convention, because it has nothing to do with recognition or enforcement of the arbitral award? So I had an occasion to have a chat with Professor Vandenberg about this, and he was a junior to Peter Sanders, who actually drafted the convention. So what he had told me was, when the convention was being negotiated, and there was a lot of infighting and a lot of disagreement as to what the content of the convention should be. But if there was one issue on which no one fought, and which was the easiest to slip into the convention, it was the fact that you should have a general agreement on the fact that if there is an agreement between the parties, then no court should interfere. And this, I think, captures the essence of the whole topic, which is you can fight about everything. You can fight about how you recognize, in what circumstances you recognize, when you don't recognize, when you will enforce, when you will not enforce. You will have a model law enacted in 1985. After that, people will fight about what the model law should contain. Not everyone will accept it and make their own laws. But on this fundamental concept that if there is a reference to arbitration, courts, whichever country you are in, you sign on to the convention, your court must say, all of you go back to arbitration. No one fought. Which is why, curiously, you will find this is Article 2 of a convention which speaks entirely on recognition and enforcement. And that, unfortunately, is the root of the whole issue here, which unfortunately I think has been not noticed enough in any of the reported judgments so far. So if you go back to the first case, or really first reported instance when this has been implemented, it's a very famous award of Dow Chemicals versus Isova Saint-Gobain in Paris. Now there, it was the exact opposite of the situation. What happened was you had a consenting non-signatory who wanted to join. So it wasn't somebody on whom the agreement was being foisted and he was resisting. This fellow came on board saying, I haven't signed, but I am consenting. I'm saying I have done things in furtherance of this. I want to sue. I want to arbitrate. And the whole question was, what business does he have? He actually hasn't signed. And the French came up with their own justification and saying, well, there is nothing grossly wrong, because if you look at it, for all practical purposes, this fellow has consented. Which, according to me, is the essence of the concept. Now, if you look at how this concept has thereafter been applied, and it has been applied across all the countries which have signed the New York Convention. Some of them are civil law countries, some of them are common law countries. In civil law, the way they phrase it, the French, they have a word for it which literally means extend. So they are not saying non-signatory, they are only saying we are extending the agreement. So it just, we are creeping and we acquire you also. You word there, but we make you part of it. The common law expression is compelling a non-signatory to arbitrate. So it uses a far more stronger expression saying compel. But what it boils down to is this. If you look at all the countries and the experience that they've had in the aftermath of the Dow Chemicals arbitration, you will see that they have basically brought it down to one of 5 concepts, all of which are offshoots of consent. One is you would see this concept of alter ego. 2, you would see this concept of agency. 3, you would see this concept of a third party beneficiary. 4, you would see a concept called equitable estoppel. 5 would be a concept of group of companies, which basically Dow Chemicals was concerned with. Now in all of these cases, the commonality of the whole thing, what is the tribunal really looking at, or the court as the case may be, it's looking at the fact that did you really consent? Because it looks at the competing inequity of it. So one fellow takes a benefit under a contract and then turns around and says, I didn't sign, so I can't be bound. And the court says that we will not permit. So the court will look at the conduct of the person concerned who claims to be or who is alleged to be a non-signatory to say, let's look at an alter ego. What is an alter ego? You signed, but this fellow is the alter ego of that. If you look at agency, yes, he is the principal with whom the contract was signed, but this guy is the agent. He's actually performed everything. Now he can't run around. So I'll tell you of an instance where we did this practically in Supreme Court. You will see a reported 11-6 called Sirajuddin Qasim versus Paramount Investments. In Sirajuddin Qasim, Paramount Investments was the signatory. But in the reported judgment, you will see Paramount Investments and another. So we actually filed the 11-6 against the chartered accountant of Paramount Investments. Why? We invoked the principle that for all practical purposes, he was the third party beneficiary of the contract. Everything ultimately flowed to him. He's the one who performed. He's the one who caused the contract to be executed in the first place. The point is, in 11-6, this was never resisted. Ultimately, the whole matter came up and it got resisted after the arbitrator was appointed. Before the sole arbitrator, Justice Sinha, this argument is then taken to say that, oh, but I never signed the contract, how did you bind me? And there what we essentially argued was you didn't bring this up at 11-6. And now because of SBP versus Patel Engineering, sorry, this is final, you can't reopen it. And the matter eventually what happened, 2 years later the guy settled, everyone settled. Claimants got what they wanted. So the reason I gave you this example is this has a lot of practical benefit. This concept has a lot of practical benefits, and essentially tribunals and courts across the world have applied it for its benefits. What they see is a fellow who benefits from the entire transaction as a whole. Don't look at it just as an arbitration, because that's just a clause in the contract. Look at the transaction as a whole, and you see this gentleman has benefited from it, and now he's turning around and saying, I didn't sign. And the tribunal then says, no, he has to be a party, and they then basically apply one of these 5 justifications to then say, okay, we'll look at it, whether one of these, because these 5 are the most widely accepted justifications internationally. Now coming to how you look at this entire backdrop, conceptual backdrop that I gave you, in the context of India. The first disclaimer that I must give you is any of the judgments, even Astro versus Lipo, if you look at it, they all turn on the language of the statute in the context of which they were decided, number 1. Number 2, they all turn on the peculiar facts. Each of them has peculiar facts and circumstances, which is extremely relevant to how to determine whether there was this consent or not. And therefore, in the context of India also, wherever you see judgments, and I think the only judgment of relevance which was there in India, which Chlorocontrols did not look at, was Indovind versus Westcare. Indovind versus Westcare, if I don't have the benefit of this, but I can just give you the paragraph numbers from SEC because I'm carrying this. What happened was very interesting. You have this sort of a situation where there is a signatory, there is a non-signatory. Section 9 filed in the High Court against the non-signatory. In the Section 9, a plea is taken, I didn't sign, therefore 9 is not maintainable against me. At the same time, there is an 11-6 also filed before the High Court. Now, unfortunately, this whole thing is in the context of a domestic arbitration, so Part 1 applies here. We didn't have the benefit of considering 45 also. Curiously, High Court disallows 9, allows 11-6. So the High Court agrees that this fellow was not a party and therefore 9 is not maintainable. What the learned Chief Justice of the Madras High Court said, and I'll quote, he was prima facie a party. Now how does he say that? If you see the reported judgment para 9, you will see there are 6 instances, or rather 5 instances to be fair, which the learned Chief Justice extracts, designated. And he looks at all of this to say that this fellow is one of the promoters. The guy who was the signatory is the director of that company. He looks at that fact that the fellow acted in terms of the agreement. So you are looking at the very classic factors which are internationally looked at to apply one of the 5 doctrines. So the argument, although it does not use these expressions, it's basically that and that only. What happens is, when all this gets challenged in the Supreme Court, the court frames it as a question of law that whether an arbitration clause found in an agreement between 2 parties could be considered a binding arbitration agreement on a person who is not a signatory. So I think the first place where the court starts in a very pedantic manner, we are framing a question to which there can only be one answer. So you are framing such a question to which there cannot be 2 opinions about it. Then the second question, which obviously flows from the first question, the way I read the judgment, whether a company could be said to be a party to a contract containing an arbitration agreement, even though it did not sign the agreement containing an arbitration clause with reference to its subsequent conduct. The point is, obviously there will be no prior conduct. You are going to look at it as, if you look at any of the international cases, they do not look at prior or subsequent. They look at the fact that is there consent. So consent could be prior, consent could be subsequent. You are going to look at the inequity of the fact that unless you look at it as an issue of consent, implied, deemed consent, whatever you call it, you are creating a situation of inequity. But what the Supreme Court does here is it frames it as a question of only subsequent conduct. So obviously it looks only as subsequent conduct after that. Now thereafter the court extracts section 7. But what I think is more important here, if you have the screen in front, it will make it a little easier. We'll go back to section 2 only, because I think that is the end of the matter once you frame the question like this. You look at, first let's look at 7 here. First, let's look at 7. What is an arbitration agreement? An agreement by the parties. That's the language used in the Arbitration Act. I'll tell you why I'm going to take you through this, because I'll bring you back to 45 at the end and connect it to what Devansh said, because that's according to me the bigger problem which Chlorocontrols has created. Arbitration agreement means an agreement by the parties to submit to arbitration all or certain disputes which have arisen or may arise between them in respect of a defined legal relationship, whether contractual or not. Arbitration agreement may be in the form of an arbitration clause, shall be in writing. If it is in writing, if it is a document signed by parties, so and so, so and so, so and so. Now let's go back to section 2. If you look at 2, first look at 2b. Arbitration agreement means an agreement referred to in 7. And you saw 7 said signed by the parties. Then you look at 2h. 2h says party means party to the arbitration agreement. So now, in light of the fact that You obviously have a statute which is worded in that manner. It comes down to the fact that we don't care what is the international trend. Yes, we are a country which has signed on to the New York Convention. Yes, we subscribe to the UNCITRAL model law, but we have our own peculiar law. Now, I don't know if any of you attended the first session. I was telling you about the fact that when the Arbitration Act was enacted, it was never really debated. You basically had 3 successive ordinances and then government telling Parliament, fait accompli. Now a lot of people are arbitrating. If you don't enact this law, it will go into limbo. So make it a law. And Parliament, the members of the Parliament are telling the government, how dare you make this an ordinance, you bypassed us. And then the government saying, okay, we are cutting a sorry figure, now make this a law because you really can't, have this sort of uncertainty in our country, and then it becomes a law. So this is precisely what happens when you tinker with the wording of a provision. Now if you look at the international practice, had you worded your statute, whether 8, whether 45, in a way that is consistent with international practice, you wouldn't have this problem. Unfortunately today, A, you have a statute which is peculiarly worded, and B, you have a court which says, I will stick to the statute. And I will word my question in such a way that I will get an answer straight away from the statute, even though I don't care what happens abroad. So the court looks at the fact that Westcare hasn't entered into any agreement. Absolutely a formal approach. The very fact that parties carefully avoided making Indowind a party, and the fact that director of Subudhi, though a director of Indowind, was careful not to sign the agreement on behalf of Indowind, shows that parties did not intend. So it's on a purely formal requirement. Some fellow didn't sign, some fellow was careful not to sign. So therefore there is no intent to be a party. Then it says the mere fact that so and so described it as a nominee in a later thing will not make Indowind a party in the absence of a ratification, so and so, so and so, so and so. Then it says that it is not permissible in a proceeding under 11 to merely hold that a party is prima facie a party to the arbitration agreement and that is prima facie bound by it. The question to be asked is whether there is an arbitration agreement between the parties. The examination cannot extend to examining the agreement to ascertain the rights and obligations regarding performance between the parties. And ultimately, what does the court conclude? So the non-signatory, the other party, basically placed decisions of the US Court of Appeals, and these are actually not the correct decisions on the point. There are several other decisions of US Court. There's one called Charles O. Grigson. There's several other judgments on this point. There's one called Hellenic Investments, which are exactly on this point. But there I must also confess and tell you this. US also doesn't follow the model law. They have an FAA of 1925. So their Federal Arbitration Act predates New York Convention, predates model law. They don't even have any convention obligations. They don't bother with. They work in their own mechanism. In their sui generis mechanism of such an old law, they still have reached this level where they have accepted that this is the international trend, and it is synchronized with, it can synchronize with the interpretation of our statute. What the court holds is very interesting. These decisions are of no assistance as they do not relate to a provision similar to Section 7 of the Indian Act. So, why is it that I am giving you this decision in so much of detail? Because I started by telling you any of these decisions that you read abroad or in India, they all turn on the language of their statute and they all turn on their own facts. If I read chlorocontrols and I close the reported judgment and I sit down and close my eyes, what I see is that the court, basically the way in Reliance, first realized this is going to be really wrong if I allow this. So I'm definitely not going to allow these parties, they have to arbitrate. I have to figure out, I have to stitch up the reasons. And which is why, if you go back to the wording of 45, I think on the words used in 45 itself, Chlorocontrols has not examined this aspect. I think Chlorocontrols should be reconsidered. I'll show you why. Let's split the words used in 45. Notwithstanding anything contained in Part 1 or in CPC, a judicial authority. Great. So till this extent, convention, you're basically respecting what your convention says. So you're saying, yeah, I may have made some provision in Part 1, I have a convention obligation. I may have said something in CPC, disregard, I have a convention obligation. So non-obstant clause. any judicial authority, so it doesn't even specify which court, but any judicial authority, when seized of an action in a matter, what is the matter? And that is what is most important according to me. In respect of which the parties have made an agreement referred to in section 44. Chalo, the word parties is still not defined. We'll look at the section therefore in a holistic manner. Shall. So it is compulsory. What is compulsory? At the request of, and I think this is the part that needs to be seriously examined. There is a distinction between, in section 45 with respect, who will make the request and who will be referred. You look at the words. At the request of one of the parties or any person claiming through or under him. To me, this appears to be Dow Chemicals. So I am a consenting non-signatory. I did not sign, but I want to initiate proceedings. Who is the one requesting therefore? Either one of the parties to the agreement has requested or any person who is claiming through or under him. So one of the 5 exceptions comes in. So the request is to be made by a consenting non-signatory. But who will be referred? Refer the parties to arbitration. Now if the parliament had this intention of what Eurocontrols is saying with respect, the wording would have been refer the parties or any person claiming through or under him to arbitration.
Can you just repeat the point again? I just lost
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the question that we are looking at here in Eurocontrols? Can a non-signatory be made a party to an arbitration? So the question that we are trying to look at is the fact that the court in a judgment holds without looking at any of the settled international principles, the 5 principles I gave you, and comes up with its own justification for saying, yes, I know there are judgments in part 1, we don't need to look at them, the language is different in section. Let's look at 45. If I interpret 45, by a theory of connection or connexity, if you look at it, I can say even a non-signatory can be made a party. The reason I disagree with that is because if you look at the language of 45, see what is 45 trying to do? It's implementing an international convention obligation. So the parliament is cognizant of the fact that you may have some contrary provision in part 1 that you've enacted for your domestic arbitrations. It's cognizant also that there may be some provisions in CPC which may create this sort of a complication. So parliament is first closing the door by saying non-obstante clause. Don't throw anything anywhere, this is definitive and any judicial authority, a judicial authority, so anybody. What is he seized of? He is seized of an action in a matter in respect of, so an action, it's the widest possible manner, in a matter, in respect of which parties have made an agreement. Correct? So there are parties to an arbitration agreement, they have made an agreement, referred to in 44. And this is where I'll agree with Devansh, where you're looking at the agreement not exclusively in the context of agreement in section 2, but you're looking at it as a agreement. Of course it's defined elsewhere, but you're looking at 44 which says in this chapter unless the context otherwise required so and so means so and so in pursuance of an agreement in writing for arbitration to which the convention applies. Convention's applicability is settled by article 1 of the convention. The point is, if you look at the words used beyond shall, there is a distinction in the section as to who can ask for this, but who will be referred. Who can ask is clear. A consenting non-signatory, which is Dow Chemicals, can come forward and say, this is my request. I know I am not one of the parties to the arbitration agreement. This fellow has filed a suit before you, he hasn't produced the arbitration agreement. The other side should have produced it, they haven't produced. I am a consenting non-signatory. I am affected by this. I am claiming through or under one of the parties. I come forward and I am saying refer them to arbitration. But who is the one referred? The one who is referred are the parties to the arbitration. If it had to incorporate of this language, then the expression used in the preceding part of the section should have been continued in the subsequent part of the section. If this happens, then according to me, you are back to square one. You are either back to Indovind versus Westcare. Now there, if you had referred to Indovind versus Westcare, the door had to be shut and Mr. Nariman would have won. But there is no reference to Indovind versus Westcare in the judgment. So it's per incurring this judgment. Second, if you look at the whole concept then as a larger concept, you are then back to the question, you are asking the wrong question when you are saying in light of, which is what the Law Commission has said with respect to the Law Commission. You are asking the wrong thing if you are saying in light of fluoro control should we bring it into part 1. No. In light of fluoro controls, do we reword part 1, part 2? The expressions both have to be changed. Because if the court was constrained only because of the wording of the Arbitration Act in Indovind, simply because fluorocontrols didn't make a reference to Indovind does not mean that fluorocontrols has to be looked at the gospel truth and you disregard this judgment. Because this is also by division bench. So I would say that the right question which the Law Commission needs to ask and the question which therefore needs to be answered is why act partisan in saying that this has to be done for international arbitrations and in domestic arbitrations? You decide as a whole, you take up the concept. Your statute was never really debated. So now you are a law commission, you are looking at this in hindsight. You have the benefit of 20 years of litigation, 20 years of reported value. If you are going to do it, I think, in a holistic way for the whole statute. If you are going to look at it piecemeal, you are again going to, just like Indovind framed the question in such a way that you have to get one answer. The law commission will also eventually end up framing a question which will give one answer. And I don't think that's the right answer to the question. So, and again, coming back to the last thing before I conclude, because I think we've taken a lot of time. I think ultimately what you need to look at is the fact that the Supreme Court, though has delivered a judgment in the complicated facts and circumstances of a case, as a proposition of law, just like in Bhatia, we did not get any guidance as to what is express or implied exclusion of Part 1. There is no guidance as to what is this connection because it has to be determined in the facts and circumstances of every case. There is a passing reference to these 5 principles in the judgment. There's one little paragraph where that's just been touched. But at the end of the day, I think we really need a little more guidance from the court. Hopefully, if Endrag versus Moglaw comes to Supreme Court, that should be a good occasion. We would really hope that the court actually explains itself to say, because otherwise, if you look at judgments in the aftermath of Bhatia, and I can give you about 7 or 8, Mr. Banerjee gave you all of them in the morning. What eventually happened was, whoever was arguing for either party, because he knew the court hadn't left it clear, this guy rolled up his argument, this guy rolled up his argument because he didn't know what he was responding to. And the court rolled up both of them to say, in the larger facts and circumstances of the case, Part 1 is excluded. Is not excluded. I think the only cases where they did not was Venture. Venture, I told you in the morning, was on the turned on the non-obstante clause more than anything else. DOSCO on its own facts. Reliance, which I have personal some misgivings about it. And therefore, I think the conclusion that I would leave you with is any of you, if you can go back to these 5 principles of consent, not connection, and if you feel that in the facts of fluorocontrols you can actually reconcile it to say yes, connection is wider than consent, but it can be reconciled in some way with the principles of consent because you're going back to the basic avoiding the inequity, that is the mischief that you are trying to avoid. Then I think that would be a very, very interesting thing to read. If any of you decide to write on it, definitely I would be game to see how you're reconciling it. I would be very interested in that. Thank you.